highly detailed 375 microgram report, ego death. Yo, what's going on? It's someone that's no one, and welcome to today's report. Today's report is coming from an anonymous user, and this is coming from the same user that actually made a fake 1P-LSD report in which he received what he thought would be 1P-LSD, turned out to be something way different, and it's our first unknown experience. So if you are interested in watching that first, you can find a link to that down below in the description. When this happened, January 2019, the drugs used 1P-LSD, cannabis, and nicotine at a dose of 375 micrograms, and he smoked a joint. And the route of administration, smoked and sublingually, gender, male, weight 145 pounds, age 17, prior experience. His background is very broad, containing drugs for mostly every class. Setting, he states, me and my friend stayed overnight at her uncle's house on an acreage, mainly stayed in the kitchen/living room area upstairs and downstairs in a large TV room with a couch and doors right to the backyard. There was also a dog with us. So this is a very in-depth report and a very good look at what can happen on a high dosage like this and what an ego death experience somewhat looks like. So it's a long one. I know you guys been asking for those, and hey, here we are. Here we got a super long one. So I know you guys are going to like this one, and without further ado, let's dive right into it. This trip report is going to be my third time taking 1P-LSD, and how this one experience, along with where I was in life, has shaped me completely as a person and entirely changed my outlook on life, society, friends, interactions between people, and myself. It has changed every aspect of my life, and I believe changed me in the most positive way I could have hoped. So let's begin. A few weeks before this, I bought 12 tabs of 1P, and I had lots left over from my second experience. Because I didn't wait for my tolerance to come down, that experience was still good, but I wanted to go farther. The opportunity to stay overnight at my friend's uncle's house came up, and it was perfect. Out on an acreage, secluded from basically everything, we would have the house free all evening, overnight, and through the next afternoon, so this started to shape up in my mind as a perfect place to trip. Set and setting are one of the most important things while tripping, and I wanted to make sure I had somewhere safe with someone I trusted, so I decided doing it out at the house. I was picked up and me and Samantha drove out to the acreage. I was originally thinking that taking it the morning after we got there, but ended up taking it that night. My prior knowledge of LSD really only consisted of the short things I had researched and my past two experiences. None of this knowledge included ego death. I may have heard of it at the time, but really had no idea what it was. I had read no trip reports on it or heard any experiences with it. I barely knew that ego death existed, which is important in how I perceived what was happening and how I explain it now. I sat down at the kitchen counter and brought out my tabs. I took 2 tabs and a half that I had left over and put them all on my tongue around 6 p.m. Time pretty much lost meaning after this, so things are just going to happen in chronological order or how I remember them. Now, this was over double the dose I had previously taken with tolerance, so I had not even fully experienced the effects of half this dose. Each tab was 150 mics, so around 375 micrograms in total I ingested. I remember feeling the tabs moving around in my mouth and thinking, damn, this is a lot of acid. I looked at Samantha and said, damn, yeah, this is a lot of acid, and we laughed about it. We proceeded downstairs to the couch so I could just hang out on the come-up. I think we just hung out on the couch until I started to feel the acid. It started with this electrical energy buzz starting in my legs and working its way all through my body. This feeling put all of my anxiety away, and I felt very confident heading into the trip while feeling excited for what was to come. I then started to get a slight change to my perception and vision. My vision began to seem more HD, and slowly the feeling of being in a trip started to creep in. I remember looking at the couch we were on, and the texture of the fabric just looked a little more prominent. I reached out and felt it and was taken aback by how soft and interesting it felt. I just kept looking at the fabric and kept feeling it for 10 minutes or so, just wowed by the texture and look. This body load of energy continues to increase, and by about 40 minutes in, I was in pure euphoria. I took my attention away from the couch finally and looked at the TV. The visual effects had just started to become more prominent. A video of skiing was playing, and watching it was fantastic. The snow looked extra white. The people skiing all had beautiful tracers behind them, following the colors of their jackets through each scene. As I kept watching, the visuals kept coming on, but not extremely fast. The snow started to change colors in this beautiful overlay of neon lights almost, constantly switching colors and looking quite amazing. I also started to see the screen in more of a 3D way, where the skiers looked like every time they hit a jump, they would come out of the screen and land back in the screen, as well as the snow seeming to be 3D and slightly coming out of the screen. It was very immersive, and I was laughing at the snow changing colors with those come-up giggles. I really had no fucking idea what was about to come, but I was enjoying the come-up very much. Samantha and I had wanted to smoke at some point during the evening, seeing how she was sober at this point, and I really enjoyed smoking on LSD, so we decided to go out and pick up some weed. We got up and went out the back door and walked to the car, which I don't remember very well. We started driving, and Samantha told me we were going to pick up her older brother and get some weed, and then roll a couple joints and head back to the house. At this point, I was coming up even more, and I just sort of said, okay. Totally just focused on what was going on with this trip. The car ride got weird when we were just on an open road. I started to feel the perception change of the LSD. Sitting in the passenger seat of the car was just the weirdest fucking thing. My brain couldn't comprehend how I was sitting in this car and driving around. The outside world felt very disconnected, and I became a little disoriented when looking out the windshield because I just really didn't know what the fuck was going on, but in a funny way. All the street lights and traffic lights were stunningly beautiful, just glowing, tracing, and moving outside the car. We pulled up to a stoplight, and I remember looking out the window at the ground where there were a couple of gray snow piles up against the curb. The snow piles had these pointy cones, almost like spikes, just sticking all over them, but the spikes looked as though they were made of snow. It was extremely 3D, and they just slightly wiggled as I looked at them, but they were full-fledged real as real can be. Perfectly geometric cones pointing up is the best way to describe them. Anyway, I don't remember much of the drive until we picked up Samantha's brother from his house and started to drive to the dispensary. This was the first time meeting him, and I had to act normal while coming up on this acid because he didn't know I was on anything. I just kinda sat straight and stared, holding laughter at this absurd situation I was in. I was tripping quite hard, going to get weed in my friend's car, having no idea where we were, and now this guy is in the back seat and doesn't know I'm tripping balls. It was hilarious at the time, and I ended up bursting into laughter and telling him, sorry, but I'm on acid right now, and he was totally cool with it. It felt like the LSD made me want to be honest with him, and so I just told him. So we pick up this weed from the dispensary, and we head back to Samantha's brother's house to roll. I don't remember any of that drive until we got there, and Samantha decided to go into her brother's house to roll some joints with him, so I said, oh, I'm good, I'll stay in the car. I have no estimate of what time it was here, but it was very dark, and I was just chilling in the car, outside alone, and looked at my pants. The weaving began to wiggle a little, and I could start to see beautiful geometric patterns form all over my legs, fractaling on every surface of my pants. My pattern recognition feels turned up to the max on acid, so whenever I see any sort of design, it immediately becomes flowing geometry. Then the fractals started to become 3D as well, and make these little 5-sided pyramids that join the fractal patterns moving around on my pants. I was so intrigued by how they looked 3D and how the material now looked to touch that I touched my leg, and to my surprise, it was almost as if I could feel these small fractal pyramids on my legs. It was as if they were actually little bumps of matter on my leg, and I could interact with them. This effect is crazy to me. In some way, the LSD affected my brain to the extent that I thought I could physically feel hallucinations, and the fact it was as real, if not realer than reality, made it super immersive. I stared at my legs and my surroundings outside of the car until Samantha came back outside and hopped in the car. She had 2 joints with her, made in a roller. They almost looked perfect, and to my brain on acid, they looked absolutely amazing. We drive back to the house with weed in hand, which I don't remember, and we head in the front door. Samantha grabs a lighter, and we head downstairs and out onto the small concrete patio underneath a balcony. Stepping outside at this time into the backyard was pretty visually stimulating. Everything in my vision had a glowing psychedelic halo around it, and all the lights dotting the yard and stars in the sky created beautiful fractal patterns stretching and breaking all over my vision. I remember the snow having a very weird look to it, but I can't remember exactly how it looked. All these children's toys littered around looked like they were alive and moving, so it was a pretty stunning thing to look at. We went to a corner of the patio right before the snow and lit up this joint. Now my belief is at this time, I was just about to peak on the 1P. My best guess for time here was an hour and a half to 2 hours into the experience, and adding marijuana to LSD can greatly intensify the trip, so me smoking a heavy sativa maybe 15 minutes before I peaked caused the synergy between the 2 substances and was the cause of my wonderfully terrifying ego death I had 15 minutes later. So I light up this joint by holding it in my mouth and just cupping it so there was no wind. I click the lighter on and bring it to the end of the joint, and I am just mesmerized by this flame. It's close to my face, so I can see all the details, and it just looked magnificent. It had this amazing orange glow that filled my vision, and looking into the flame, I saw hot orange fractals and wisp of energy. It was stunning. It took me a bit to light the joint because I was just staring at the flame, but we get it lit and smoke it. This, I will say, has to be one of life's greatest things, smoking a fat, nicely packed joint or backwood on LSD. It is the most amazing thing. We smoked this whole joint just standing and talking, and me looking around at my surroundings, then decide to head back inside. I don't feel anything extra from the weed as we walk upstairs. We get up into the kitchen and go behind the counter. I think I got some water. This was maybe 5 minutes after we smoked, and I just finished drinking my glass of water and was standing beside Samantha in the middle of the kitchen. I then started to zone out. What seemed to be my consciousness and vision sort of just floated upwards and out the top of my head, and I saw Samantha and I just standing there in complete third person. This was extremely trippy, and as soon as I realized what was happening, I was back in my body. It was almost like a dissociative out-of-body experience, but completely clean, with basically no other distortions. Very, very intense, and a little disorienting because I didn't know what just happened. I didn't know what to think, but this was alarming, and I had the feeling something was happening in my brain. I walked maybe 15 steps over to a bench at the doorway. Kitchen and doorway are basically in the same room, and sat down. I looked straight forward at the kitchen, where Samantha was standing in the middle, and proceeded to trip out hard. I looked in Samantha's direction for maybe a second, and then everything changed. Almost instantly, the room got more square and stretched around my vision. More so, my vision seemed to be stuck staring at this room. It was the exact same room I had seen a second ago, except there were no decorations. The entire fort turned into this black and white checkerboard pattern, and I noticed that Samantha was no longer fucking standing there. She was just gone in an instant, as well as normal reality. The room I was now in felt, the only way I may be able to describe it, like a jester's room. The floor being a checkerboard gave me an extremely tripped out creepy feeling of jesters and that psychedelic archetype. Something I thought about after this experience was how I had never read or heard anything about the psychedelic archetypes when I had this experience, so that archetype, without my subconscious knowing what it was, appeared in my trip. Also, the way the lighting now looked on the cabinets, made them look like an abandoned mental asylum or hospital. The shadows and colors were now more monotone and fake looking, and everything had a very pale yellow mildew vibe. I had absolutely no control over this as well. It caught me off guard because I had never experienced something so intense that I could not do anything in this way. I had forgotten completely about the fact that I had a body, and as the room changed around me, I had the deepest feeling of fear I have ever experienced. This room was all I could see, and it seemed to be just floating in space, and I was looking into it. All the dimensions of the walls were off too. One wall looked too short, but it still somehow made a perfect square. The floor was at an odd angle, tilting forwards towards me and to the right, but it still was a perfect square. It was the trippiest thing I have experienced, almost like a different dimension of this reality, a parallel reality. I also had the deepest feeling of something not being right that I have ever experienced. It was down to the core of my ego that I felt it. I said in my head, something's not right. I'm not really sure how long I was staring at this room, maybe 15 seconds, but I eventually snapped out of it, and all the fractals and tracers and acid feeling came right back in. I just stood up and said, "What the fuck? I think I should go downstairs and sit on the couch." So Samantha got her things, and we went downstairs. The stairs were weird to get down, as they all seemed to be at different angles and heights. I walked over to the couch and sat down with my legs on the couch, facing another couch maybe 6 feet away, which Samantha lay down on. I looked to the right, over the back of the couch, and again I was transported to another room. This was equally intense as the first time. Absolute loss of self and loss of body. Absolutely no control of what I was experiencing, which I found the most terrifying. Every substance I had ever taken prior to this, I had always some sort of control, even at my highest doses. It always felt like a drug to me, no matter how far I had gone, and I felt like I was always in control of my experience somewhat. This was completely different. When I saw this room, I had no control at all. It felt as though literally I had broken through. It felt as if I was not on a drug at all anymore, and I had just penetrated as far as was possible into my conscious and separated completely from my body and ego. I was astonished that a substance can take one person so far into themselves and into the universe. I said many times after this, I didn't know drugs could take you so damn far. I felt that if this was any more intense, I would simply cease to exist from the energy and become nothing. So it was extremely terrifying. This feeling is truly indescribable because never once in my life have I encountered a situation where the fear hits so hard and so deep, so I believe it may not be able to be achieved in a sober state of consciousness. However, back onto this trippy room. This time it was not just a different version of where I was. This time it was a smaller, similarly distorted checkerboard room that had the same exact Jester and Queen Hospital vibes and no furniture, just black walls and a white ceiling. This again seemed to be somewhere random in the universe, and I just peeked in at that moment. I snapped out of it and looked forward. As soon as Samantha laid down, I proceeded to have the most intense experience of my life, equally the most beautiful and scary, but this was not as terrifying as the rooms previously. However, it had a scary intensity. I believe this was my first psychedelic breakthrough and ego death. So Samantha lays down, and I'm looking straight forward at her. The image of her and the room that I was seeing instantly turned into thousands of frames that overlapped each other, moving from the middle of my vision to the top left, almost looking like an accordion or a pre-made video transition for editing. So hard to describe, but it happened very fast and was so intense it was as if reality had just been ripped apart and slowed down, and then everything went black. The next thing I remember is seeing my ego getting ripped apart into millions of fragments and dispersed throughout space. I just kind of appeared into nothingness, a black expanse that had no time or matter, and I was just a consciousness floating. I had no body and no ego. Then, a very bright flash, my ego comes into my vision as a swirling ball of pure energy, light blue and white, and then it seemed to explode right in front of my eyes. This filled my entire vision and lit up the area around me in this black space. I saw fragments of my ego go flying all around, just propelled outward and away. This happened in 5 seconds, I would say, from this reality, but where I was, there was no time, so I have really no idea. I don't remember having any emotion about this event, but that was it. My ego was no more. Its pieces scattered across the universe, and now I just had my consciousness. Then my eyes snapped open. I still am not sure how much of this was off in the psychedelic hyperspace and how much were visuals in the room I was looking at. The visuals, as I opened my eyes, were the most intense hallucinations I had ever seen. My entire surrounding, the room, was floor to ceiling in colors and fractals and plain trippiness. I remember the couch and ceiling all looking to be one piece of ever color-changing goo that was layered in fractals. The couch was multiplying to infinity. The edge of the TV and table below it that I could see looked extremely alien and distant. The room's dimensions also shifted. The TV seemed very far away, but the couch across from me seemed closer. These visuals, though, were just all I could see, full hallucinations overlapping everything. I had never seen anything like it. I then closed my eyes and went from being in this reality to being back in psychedelic hyperspace, seeing just the most magnificent and vibrant hallucinations ever all over my vision, fractals and landscapes, and then I finally started to figure out what was happening. Up until here, I barely knew ego death existed and barely knew anything about breaking through on psychs, so I was extremely lost with what was going on and just let it happen. You cannot hold on to one fragment of this reality while experiencing something like this. You need to accept what's happening and just ride. So I start to regain my thoughts. I knew I had taken LSD, and I knew I was fully disconnected from my body, which was back on Earth. Then I thought, where the fuck am I actually? I came up with the idea I was simply experiencing psychedelic hyperspace, and that all I had to do was go with the flow and let the experience happen, because at this point, I couldn't do much to stop it. After realizing all of this, I once again opened my eyes and proceeded to see the second most visually appealing show of my life. On the TV, I had put on some fractal videos where you are just diving endlessly through beautiful fractals, all computer generated and multicolored. These fractals became fully three-dimensional, coming out of the TV and filled the entire room with fractals. I'm talking floor-to-ceiling 3D fractals shooting into the TV. I looked over at the TV and immediately disconnected from my body again. I felt my conscious lift from my head again and move towards the 3D fractals that were maybe 2 feet away. Then instantly, it's all I'm experiencing, flying in this fractal world down through the fractals, just like the video, but as if these fractals were the size of a space station and I was a basketball size of consciousness flying past these endless fractals. I remember flying past them at a very high speed and watching the fractals blow up in these beautiful, multicolored explosions, sending pieces everywhere. All while this is happening, for no apparent reason, I begin to hear a song play in my head. It was familiar, but I knew I had not listened to it more than twice. This song spoke to me on another level. The melody and beat were just so crystal clear in my ears, yet I had no headphones on. A thought about this I had afterwards was the fact I had not heard this song more than twice, so I didn't know the lyrics at all. I simply recognized the melody, yet it was playing in full lyrics, so it must have been an external source, right? No speakers or headphones playing at the time. My brain was not creating the music. It was stunning. I felt as if I was in Star Wars. Then, it all disappeared, and I think I closed my eyes. It was again in a different dimension of some sort. No time, and just me floating. Then a black cube appeared in front of me. To my scale, there it looked quite small, but I was so close to it, so I could see all of it, and a bit of black space around the edge. This cube appeared to be made of glossy black metal, as I could see light reflecting off it, and as I watched it, it separated into 2 pieces, pulling apart, a top and bottom. The way they fit together, though, was both pieces had these extremely sharp and long cut-out spikes, maybe 12 on each half. That, when the cube was together, fit absolutely perfectly. It was uncomfortably precise. As the cube kept pulling apart, I seemingly floated out of my control towards it until there was a gap in between the ends of the spikes. It seemed that I shrunk as I got closer, and the spikes became bigger and more menacing. The next thing I remember is being inside the cube as it was closing, hiding in the spikes, dreading when I would get crushed as the pieces fit together. I had no control. As the pieces started to fit together, they made this horrible metallic echoing grinding sound. The best way I can describe it is being the sharpest sound I could hear. Sharpest sound doesn't make sense, but that's the best I can do. So extremely hard to describe, but I could feel it. It was piercing. I then proceeded to get squished in between these spikes as the cube tried to close, but it couldn't. It would hit me and then back off and then close again with the same metallic grinding piercing noise. I eventually pushed out of it and then opened my eyes. Mind you, in the cube, getting crushed didn't have any sensation of pain when it was happening until I opened my eyes and looked around the room. I had the normal acid visuals, but I had this immediate full body pain. Now, I don't know if my brain simply processed it as pain, but my entire body hurt to the bone and it was extremely uncomfortable. It felt like millions of infinitely sharp needles being poked into my bones all over my body. This was also when the second auditory hallucinations came in, which at this point in time, I did not even know were able to happen on LSD, but it did. It was scary at the time because I thought I just fucked my brain and went a little too far with the drugs. The sound started in my ears, and then I heard it echo until it sounded like it was going farther and farther away, and then it would start again. It was one deep bass note that sounded to me. As it got farther, it got higher pitched and sounded sharp. It was close to a water drop noise, but more electronic. So I have these intensely loud auditory hallucinations going on, and I look over at Samantha and say, "Just wait till I'm sober, you're not gonna believe what is happening." And I'm really okay, I just need to experience this. So that I wasn't freaking her out or myself. Talking at this point was so disconnected that I would have to think in my head how to say words and then say them in this very awkward way, making a bunch of mistakes. It was like I temporarily got back in my body, but not quite fully. I decided to put on my headphones and actually listen to music and see where it takes me. So I put them on, started playing music, and closed my eyes. I don't really remember what happened after that, but I now have a huge emotional connection to the music I listened to and this night. I take the headphones off, and as I'm looking at Samantha, this black fractal starts in all four corners of my vision and begins filling my vision very quickly. It goes right until there is a little circle of light at the center of my vision, and then I don't remember what happens. I woke up a couple times after, only to tell Samantha I was okay, and to look at the room as everything was so visually stimulating. Very jumbled memories of what I was actually looking at during this time, but I remember the room shifting in its dimensions, becoming longer or shorter or taller, all the while not fully knowing what was going on. I would then close my eyes and would transport with no control to somewhere new. Throughout these little wake-ups, I would always have the sense of something being very wrong, that deep sense of fear as well as difficulty to communicate. It was like my body would get flicked on as I came back, and I had to relearn how to talk and move and be human. It felt good to close my eyes and accept the intensity and just observe the LSD. I awoke the final time, and this, unlike me coming in and out, felt like I was back and I was human again. Definitely. I looked at Samantha and said, "Whoa," and slowly looked to the TV and the green-painted hallway leading to the stairs. It was like before, where my vision locked onto what I would look at, and the visuals got really intense, and it felt like I was losing it again, and then I caught it and came back. I looked around, and this happened a couple more times, me just phasing in and out of reality with the intensity of the visuals and my conscious coming back into my body. I was unaware how much my ego was affected at this point because I was just glad to be anything again. From when I sat on the couch until we went upstairs again, I think about 1.5 hours to 2 hours had passed, marking the start and end of my peak. At the time, it felt like maybe 15 to 20 minutes had passed, but no more. Time was extremely warped in my perception. I started to talk a little bit better with Samantha, but I kept thinking something is missing. I couldn't think of how to interact in a social situation. I say I think I'm good now and I'm fully back, and so we head upstairs. Upstairs we go and sit on a carpet beside the kitchen, beside some couches. I remember sitting down and looking up at the room, and the visuals were just crazy. Then I started to think about what just happened, and this idea pops into my head. Since I was tripping, I had these room trips inside the trip. I thought, wow, so a trip inside a trip, and then I remembered being nothing and how nothing was still so much, and that everything in this universe is connected, and I said out loud, life is the trip. Cheesy classic acid line, but it couldn't have been more true at the time and made perfect sense. A very profound moment. From how deeply I understood this statement at the time, it was as if I found the answer to everything, and then that feeling faded quickly. The dog had come upstairs, and he was walking through the room, and he had this massive tracer for the entire length of the room. Every single decoration and surface was covered in multicolored fractals. The walls were warping and bending. Everything was alive and moving. Patterns everywhere, faces popping in and out. The floor was flowing. It was a lot to take in. All the while this was happening, I am still having the craziest auditory hallucinations I've heard. It sounded like extremely loud church bells were going off in every room every couple of seconds. The sounds would be muffled like through a wall or be really clear and in my head. Samantha starts playing a board game, Battleship I think, and I start to realize that it's really hard to communicate as a human. I just sat there in disbelief for what I was seeing and in awe at what just happened. I look at Samantha and apologize for not being able to hold myself together at all because I was seriously in awe of just simply being here and by how wild the experience I just had was. It was quite a good moment. I think after we sit for a bit, we go outside to the driveway where there are Christmas lights hanging on the house and little street lights all the way down the driveway. This made for some really awesome visuals, and all the while we walked around a bit. It felt as if my head was not connected to my body and I was just hovering along, not walking at all. I don't remember coming back inside, but I remember being back downstairs and Samantha wanting to go to sleep, but of course I was coming off the peak of a very intense trip, so I was not going to sleep for a while. We go upstairs anyway and just lie down on the bed. There were some curtains pulled close to my right and glow from the TV power lights. Otherwise, the room was dark. The room felt extremely comfy and safe, and I knew I could just enjoy the last of the visuals, still with auditory hallucinations sounding a little less intense but very prominent. It would trip me out because it sounded like it was coming from the kitchen, or below me, or outside, but it was all in my head. The lights that were glowing had this awesome acid halo effect around them, and moving my head made them trace all over my vision. I lay there in a very thoughtful mood. I didn't really know what had happened, but I felt better. I felt a deep love and appreciation for not only life, but that we even existed. I thought about where I was in life and how displeased I was with it. We lay here talking or going on our phones for 3 hours or so until the visuals had tapered but were still there, as well as some ringing in my ears. Then I fell asleep around 4:30 a.m. Woke up at around 10 a.m. the next morning feeling absolutely amazing. Despite being wired for 10 hours the night before, I was rested and my mind felt calm and clear. I got up and went to the kitchen where Samantha was with a dog. I joined her to pet it and just looked around remembering how this room looked the night before. I was getting a bit better at communicating but would still get lost with what I was doing. I went back downstairs to clean up and get ready to go and had a very emotional moment. I looked around the room and briefly thought about what happened the night before. I started to cry from the fact that I simply had the chance to experience something so powerful and wonderful. I was grateful I experienced the immense terror that came along with it. I was grateful for my life. I spent a couple of minutes just standing there and crying while running all these thoughts through my head. We left the house around 12 p.m., and that night I was so extremely just out of it, I felt pretty bad. The following weeks I learned so much about myself from just remembering and figuring out what happened and what I could take from the experience. I believe that's the key to having lasting positive effects, i.e., not only being able to handle the experience the first time, but be able to come back to that experience and understand and use the information that you experienced. This was all I thought about for about a month and a half, and after that, it started to be less frequent, and now I'm writing this report to save this memory outside of my head. So be careful and have fun with LSD, because this substance is absolutely no joke. The intensity that can be conveyed in that experience is out of this world. I don't understand why we are able to experience this compound, but damn, I am so glad we can.